Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Our panel will begin shortly. So if you have a drink, please take a seat. If you don't have a drink, you can continue waiting in line or think about your waiting versus sitting proposition. That's up to you. But we will begin shortly.
so just to get them off. The facilities are only being used for a month and stay dormant for 11 months. The whole thing is so crazy if you think about it. And I think sometimes even as brewers forget that it takes that much work, you know. Well, especially you're on the East Coast. So there definitely is a difference between like the proximity, because it's expensive to come to Yakima.
There's a particular license called the Farm Brewery license, or New York Farm Brewery license.
All the ingredients have to come from the state of New York.
It was like 20%, then 60%. Now it's up to like 80 or 90. It's a very small thing.
Okay.
Yeah, bigger brewer, like I would say 5 tall, craft malt is probably less,
Yes.
5%.
Yeah.
But, that law was pretty exceptional when it happened, but then short, because one of the things that the Farm Bureau license was put a tap room at the brewery.
Oh, sure. Here, so.
Yes, that's why I was just looking. I'm like,
Sure.
I have my glass.
We have a holiday beer. It's a holiday beer.
Teresa, do you think you're gonna just choose like you're not gonna start with the same person every time, or do you
No, I
think?
think my first question will be kind of talk about your business is what you do.
Yeah.
And I might start but I think it would be great.
I saw you with your notes, so yes, you're prepared.
I'm kind of like, oh, did I sit in the right spot? Because I'll be the
Yeah. And then, like, do you want me to focus, like, on my project that I'm doing with the farm workers? Because it's, like, it tied in with Yakima Chief, but that's kind of, like, my main purpose.
I think definitely if you want to
Okay.
explain what that is.
Yes.
So, but after like to
Denise,
call,
I was wondering where your beer was.
call, and then be anybody.
But yeah, calling us out would be very helpful.
All right. Did I miss the opening thing?
No,
Okay. Oh, let me turn this
It's nice to see women like you in the industry.
Okay.
Because sometimes they think of like women in the beer
on. Okay, go down the line. Okay, sounds good.
and not
Put
as
this on vibrator, find out where do
but
I,
there
how do
really
I
isn't
do
that
that?
representation.
Oh,
Sometimes I go
there.
into spaces and I'm like, gosh, I've overlooked
Good evening.
healthcare.
Good evening, welcome. My name is Teresa McCullough. I'm the curator of the American Brewing History Initiative here at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. This is, thank you. This is a project to document and collect the history of beer and brewing. On behalf of my colleagues at this museum and at the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative, welcome. And before we begin, I'd like to offer a few notes of thanks, some housekeeping remarks, introductions. So first of all, thank you to all of you for being here. As always, I am so grateful for your support for this museum, for the pursuit of beer history, for the fruits of the pursuit of beer history. I want to thank also Katie Gonser and Ken Grossman. Their generous gift to this museum has supported brewing history activities here. Thank you to DC Beer and the Women's Brew Culture Club of DC, especially Brandy Holder, Mike Stein for helping spread the word about this evening's event to DC, Maryland, and Virginia beer fans. I'm grateful to my many colleagues at this museum who make this evening possible and all of the programs we do here possible with their hard work. And last but not least, of course, I want to thank our speakers for traveling to be here with us, and then our additional brewers. I'm sure you've already enjoyed some of their beer. John and Bonnie Branding of Wheatland Spring Farm and Brewery. They're an estate brewery. 100% of their farming operations are dedicated to growing ingredients for their beer. They're the first table right here on the left. And then also, we have 4 DC homebrewers, representatives from the DC Homebrewers Club. Paulette Palacios, Cole Christian, Lisa Detling, and Jake Grover. These representatives have brewed beers. They've developed recipes and brewed beers with the hops that are grown in the Victory Garden here at the American History Museum. And so please ask them about the recipes, about their beers. These hops are as locally grown as they could possibly be. I'd also like to acknowledge several special guests who are with us this evening. Several of them have traveled a good distance to be here. First, from not very far away, we welcome several horticulturalists from Smithsonian Gardens. If you could raise your hands wherever you are, they grew and harvested these hops that made the beer that we are enjoying. We are also joined this evening by Mariah Calagione, co-founder of Dogfish Head Craft Brewery. She's also now social impact leader at the Boston Beer Company. Glenn Fox is the Anheuser-Busch Endowed Professor of Malting and Brewing Sciences at the University of California, Davis. Thank you for being here. And also Susan Boyle. She's an award-winning Irish drinks writer and consultant and will soon be a Fulbright Fellow at the Smithsonian researching the history of European immigrants in the American brewing industry. So thank you so much to all of you for being here. So I'm going to be mindful of our time. We're going to have a fairly brief conversation, maybe just about 40 minutes or so. We'll save the final 10 minutes for your questions. Please feel free to be at home here this evening. Give your attention to our speakers, but when your glass is empty and you're ready to try another beer, feel free to get up, go over there, get some food. Hold on to your glass. You can bring it home with you. And then after the conversation, you'll have really till 9 o'clock to eat and drink and meet the brewers. You're welcome to walk across to the east side of this floor, the first floor, to see the food history exhibition that will stay open. There are artifacts related to the histories of home brewing and microbrewing on display there. And then also this table to my right, please pay it a visit. This is our objects out of storage display, and we have a wonderful selection of artifacts and records from our emergency collecting trip to Anchor Brewing Company in July of this year, days before the brewery was liquidated. I went with a team and we collected an amazing treasures from the brewery, tools, brewing charts, logs, photographs, the definitive business records of the brewery. So please visit and see a sampling over there. So our focus tonight is American beer in the context of a changing climate. From field to glass, American beer is uniquely vulnerable to the varied effects of this changing climate. Beer is, of course, an agricultural product. The cultivation of its ingredients, the brewing process, the distribution of beer to consumers, all of these are water and resource-intense processes. Around the world, warming temperatures, volatile weather patterns are changing the shape and reach of growing regions and also prompting growers to rethink how and when they harvest certain products. Beer consumers of the future might find that their beers are priced differently than they have been in the past, that certain styles are more prevalent than others, and even that their beers taste different. An article that was published in the journal Nature just last month forecast a decline by nearly 20% of European hop yields and a decline of more than 30% in the alpha acid content, which is the main bittering agent of European hops by the year 2050 if conditions remain the same. So these challenges are multiple, they're sobering, they feel pretty big, but a host of creative thinkers are working to make American beer sustainable and resilient and responsive. And we are very fortunate to have 4 of these individuals with us here this evening. So they're here to speak with us about their work, about the ways that they're putting their expertise to use to build a better future for beer, and about what everyday Americans can do when we shop for beer at the store or order beer from a menu. So I'd like to welcome, and I'll start on the end, Andrea Stanley. She's the founder of Valley Malt in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is creating a local malting supply chain for New England farms, breweries, and distilleries. Victoria Garza is Latin America sales manager at Yakima Chief Hops in Yakima, Washington, and she is co-founder of the annual Sesiones del Migrante beer collaboration. In the middle, we have Morgan Owl Crisp. She's co-owner of Seven Clans Brewing Company in Asheville, North Carolina. Her beers are rooted in Cherokee's harmonious relationship with their homeland and ingredients. And then Denise Ford Sawadogo is co-owner of Montclair Brewery in Montclair, New Jersey. Her beers incorporate a rich range of Caribbean and West African ingredients and brewing techniques. So my first question to each of you is if you can just explain to us. Thank you. So tell us, please, what you do. What do you do in your job? How does your business think about this intersection of climate and beer? And I'll start with Andrea, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I'm from Massachusetts, and in 2009, I read an article in a local newspaper about a bakery called the Hungry Ghost in Northampton. That was my favorite bakery. And the article was about them trying to bring wheat growing back to Massachusetts and try to make a local loaf of bread. And around that time was when The Omnivore's Dilemma had just come out, and I was really interested in articles and any information about local food systems, and thinking that that was a really powerful way to having a more sustainable future. And so I was inspired as somebody that likes to drink beer to think about, if they're thinking about making a local loaf of bread with local wheat, how about making a local beer that has local malt and hops in it. And one of the first things that I discovered, because at first I was thinking I could start a brewery and we would only use local ingredients. And as I started to look into the feasibility of that, I realized that there was really not a way to if I were to grow grains in Massachusetts in our agricultural community along the Connecticut River Valley, which is extremely fertile, I would have to somehow get that grain to Wisconsin, which was the closest malt house to us. And it was just kind of blew my mind to think that we didn't have a way of making malt closer to where all of these craft breweries were popping up around us. So I was inspired by that, and I was inspired by the people around me trying to do ambitious things around our local food system. So that's a little bit of a story of how Valley Malt was born in 2009, 2010. And what I do as a maltster is what I did in 2010, which is the first thing you need to do is you need to find a farmer. You need to find a farmer that's willing to plant barley for you. Barley is the primary cereal grain that's used in most North American beers. And so the process of malting starts with finding a farmer, having that farmer grow a particular malting variety of barley, allowing that crop to grow for about 90 days. So usually it's planted in the spring, harvested in the midsummer time. And then as a maltster, we take in that grain after it's been harvested, and we put it through a 1-week process where we put the grain into a tank and we soak it to get it to sprout. And then we take it out of that tank and we put it either on the floor to let it germinate or in another bin to let it germinate. And literally, if anybody here has ever done sprouts in their kitchen, like in a canning jar or something, that's really what we're doing. We're sprouting seeds. And those seeds are filled with starches and proteins and enzymes and all kinds of things that are critical for making beer. And so once that grain has sprouted for roughly 4 days, we transfer it to another tank called the kiln. And the kiln is basically a big dryer, and it'll take that sprouted grain, which is at about 45% moisture, and dry it down. And in that process of drying it down, it makes it stable so that we can ship it to a brewery, they can mill it, add water again, and make it into wort, which then becomes the sugar solution that yeast can feed off of to create alcohol. So you wouldn't have alcohol without the sugars that come from the malt that we make. But in addition to that primary purpose of malt, we also get a lot of the flavor from beer from malt, and the color in beer comes from malt. So we can make a light malt, we can make a dark malt, and we do all of that in that kilning process. But basically, the essential job of a maltster has been the same for the last 10,000 years, which is just to take a seed that's very hard and steely, let it sprout, and then dry it back down. And so that's my job, and I, do it 365 days a year. We have sprouting seeds in our malt house.
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Garza. I'm from Washington State, from Central Washington in Yakima. I work for Yakima Chief Hops. We are a grower-owned company, so I work with 15 hop growers and over 20 allied hop growers as well in the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. My particular job at YCH is I work with a team that's focused in different territories of the world. And my territory is Latin America and the Caribbean. And essentially our job is to make hops more accessible to brewers and beer consumers outside of North America. Because once we leave North America, it's actually quite difficult to get hops because it is an agricultural product. So that's been my job for the last 10 plus years at YCH. And in particular, my other focus is shining light to our Mexican migrant farm workers that actually make it possible for hops to be available. What they are often ignored in the supply chain of beer. So when brewers receive a box of hops on their door, they don't necessarily understand the impact and the work that it takes to get there. So from the farmer to the farm worker to the suppliers like ourselves in getting that process. So that's my particular focus. And then within YCH, we're also very unique in the fact that while we are working with our hop growers, we're also processing the hops as well in-house. And so with that, we have the ability to really see the hops go from like farm to pint. So we work with our growers closely. We work with our sister company, Yakima Chief Ranches, that are also cultivating new hop varieties, which then helps us determine hops to put out into the market. And then the hops in general, like my companion was saying here, is that while the grain is mostly focusing on the alcohol content and what makes the alcohol, we're really focused on the aroma and the flavor of the beer. So when you're smelling a beer, a lot of those aromas are coming from the hops themselves. And there are over 200 different varieties of hops out there, so it's up to the brewer to decide if they're going to do a single hop beer or multiple hops in a beer. So that's what we're there for, to provide for the brewer.
And I'm going to ask a follow-up question real quick. Victoria, if you could speak to what tasks would a Mexican migrant worker do to cultivate and harvest the hops?
Yeah, so in the states of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, we heavily rely on our farm workers. And currently we're using the H-2A program to help with that necessity, because there isn't people signing up, to do that job. It's very, very difficult. Just to put into perspective, in order for hops to grow up the vine by summer solstice, the hops have to be touched twice. So we're talking about millions of hop vines in a field that are having to physically be touched by human hands. So what they're doing there is they're helping train the hops to go up the vine. They're helping with irrigation. They're helping with soil management. So everything that you can think of on the farm, these individuals are having it to do by hand. And then when it comes to actual hop harvest, the farms are operating at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, continuous rotation, so that we can get the hops off the vine as soon as possible, because we are within short picking windows. And if you don't pick the hops within that time frame, the hops can actually not have the right aroma or the right profile in them. So technically they fall within the specs of that hop variety. And we're really trying to hone in on getting that specific hop variety for the brewers. So while the farmers are incredibly important, the farm workers are even more important, because they're actually going in there and physically doing the labor that it takes for hops. And I think as consumers and sometimes brewers, I think there's this void in terms of understanding the amount of work that it takes for hops to be available to them. And I mean, outside of what we're going to be talking about of climate, it's also people that are needed on the farm.
Shio Nagata. Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan Al Crisp. I always start off, I think, by telling people, because I'm very proud that I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. There's only about 16,000 of us. And so I think my heritage and my culture has always been very important to me, and I've been always been inspired by storytelling. So my intro into beer is unlike a lot of brewers. I wasn't a home brewer. I really didn't have an interest in craft beer until I know many of you may be familiar with Asheville, North Carolina, and it is beer city, capital of monstrosity of the world, to put it lightly. And so I got to start meeting people that were in the industry, and I had a background in publishing. And so my focus was promoting Native voices, so making sure that our recipes, our cultural stories, we have a 10,000-year-old oral stories. And so I was making sure that those were in print. And so I had friends in the industry that said, "Hey, Morgan, this sounds like a great idea. Why don't you tell a story through beer?" And so I said, okay. So I contract brewed, worked with some brewers, and we created our first beer. We don't have it here tonight, but it's on our table if anybody's seen that. It's our Seven Clans Blonde, and it was inspired by Shaylu, our first woman. And she was very inspiring to me because as a mother and a woman, and the sacrifices that you make for your family, and kind of the responsibility that women have in their tribe. I was thinking about all of those things, and so that's what inspired that beer. We made it, and people, they enjoyed the story, and they actually enjoyed the beer. So it became something that I got to do more of. So I always say it's strange because I wasn't really, never really thought I was supposed to be doing this. I wasn't supposed to be in craft beer. I had no, so I was able to tell stories through beer, and I've learned a lot about beer. The ingredients that I use are inspired by our traditional cultural ingredients. Most all of the beers have some stories linked to them, and there's not a lot of natives in brewing, just a very few of us, and we are still kind of fighting our own stigmas in our own communities about alcohol, but also sharing our culture through our alcohol. So it's not been an easy journey, to say the least, but I'm very proud of that. So, you know, I don't know what the future holds. Every day when I tell our staff when we're making a new beer or we have the tap room, we're just kind of seeing what the consumers want from us. A lot of people come in, they want to know more about our culture, and I think that's one of the reasons why I started this. And I just get to share it through beer. So, cheers to that. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Denise Ford Sourdough, and I am the co-founder and co-owner of Montclair Brewery in Montclair, New Jersey, just a 4-hour drive from DC. My husband and I opened up Montclair Brewery, opened up our doors 5 years ago. We just finished celebrating our 5-year anniversary. Thank you. Somewhat similar to Morgan, I would not have guessed 10 years ago that I would be an owner of a craft beer brand. My background is marketing, the business development, product development, working for large corporations. My husband is a craftsman, so he homebrew for many years. He does many other things in addition to homebrewing, many other culinary skills. And it was actually his idea to, hey, let's open up a brewery. Being the pragmatic one, after doing a lot of research, and I'm the one that's always doing research, just enjoy doing that, said, hey, you know what? You may actually have an idea here. Maybe this is something that can work. So after about 2 or 3 years of planning, we found a location because we actually do have a brick and mortar. We are the first brewery in our town, a brick and mortar that actually produces beer. We are also the first brewery in New Jersey with owners that look like us. So I think you guys know what I mean. So very similar to the native ownership when you're looking at African American ownership or Black ownership of breweries, less than 1% in the US are owned by people of African background. So it really meant a lot for us to be able to offer this to our community. One of the things and reasons for opening, we said we wanted to intentionally add our culture and our background into what we do. We didn't want to just be another brewery, because what's the purpose if we're just going to be another brewery? So Because of that, my husband is from West Africa, a country called Burkina Faso. And he grew up with many other ingredients like the baobab fruit, which we do have 2 beers that we're pouring here today that it's also made with the African baobab fruit. So we incorporate that. We also incorporate hibiscus. My family is actually from the Caribbean. So we actually incorporate ingredients from that culture as well into our beers. In addition, we are pouring today our sorghum gluten-free beer called the Motherland. And thank you. And that one is actually inspired by indigenous beer from Africa, so called the Dolo. So it's a normal part of the culture there that women brew, and they brew like their family beer, and that's usually called the Dolo, and that's made usually with sorghum. So once again, wanting to tie our backgrounds and our culture, we thought that was important for us to do our version of the Dolo. With that, luckily, we don't have to import that from Africa. Thankfully, lots of places in the U.S. do grow sorghum, so we are able to source that locally. However, our baobab, we do import that from West Africa, and we feel like that's a big part of who we are, and that point of difference that we bring to the American craft beer scene.
Thank you very much. So now this is a question for anybody, but I'm curious, in your work, in the various things you do, in what ways have you become aware of the effects of a changing climate? I'm especially interested in things that might be less visible to consumers, whether perhaps it's farther up the supply chain, and what you are doing, what steps you're taking in your business to address or engage with those issues.
I think we'll talk about this more as it lands more in our field. We're dealing with agriculture products. So whenever we're dealing with Mother Nature, it's really a test on what the next year is going to bring us. So in particularly, like what Teresa was mentioning about the European hops and like kind of the concerns that are happening over there. Over here, we're thinking about the impact. Well, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest, we're thinking about water and we're thinking about wildfires. Our growers are constantly with generational knowledge and also thinking about the future, understanding how climate is going to affect the way they do business now and how they're going to do business in the next 20 years. So in the now, YCH is working with the state of Washington in terms of like water conservation, and then also working with different breweries to bring about more information on like wildfires. And the reason kind of going into the wildfire situation is that if we are like in this pocket of smoke, it can definitely affect the quality of the hop. The hop can definitely absorb a lot of that smoke, and the hops can, they will transfer into the beer, and the beer won't be able to be poured for the brewer. So it changes that. So with us, we're really trying to be conscious of that, be aware that that is the reality that we face in the Pacific Northwest. So in order to help with that, working with our sister company, with the Yakima Chief Ranches, we're looking for varieties that could withstand, when we're facing challenges with smoke, with water, even with weather. We're very dependent on heat, but not too high of a heat, because then that will stunt the growth of the hop. We also don't want it to be too cold, because it will stunt the growth of the hop. So we were really trying to be in that middle ground. And if we don't have the hops that can survive those ups and downs with climate change, well, then the brewers themselves are going to suffer, because we won't have enough supply to give to them, and or not have the varieties that meet true to type for what they are. So our growers are thinking about they're thinking 5, 10, 15 years ahead of the conversation that's happening now. But I think for us, our best bet is hoping that I think as a community, that we definitely think about this and that it gets better, but also as a beer consumer, that this is the reality that suppliers face, especially on the ingredient side. And there's really so much we could do with having control of the hop and how it's going to produce in that following year. So again, just trying to find hops that are best suited and can grow within these changing climates.
So similar to Victoria, we also obviously are feeling the effects of climate change in the Northeast. So when I think about Valley Malt as a maltster, I think of us as a regional maltster. And I've even now started to realize that even like with a local food system, hyperlocal isn't really going to be the answer, especially with climate change. So thinking regionally and thinking about the Northeast as our region has really become necessary. And so for Valley Malt in particular, and the supply chain that we are a part of, the sort of craft malt, craft beer supply chain, we already live in an area where weather is crazy. So New England is kind of classically known for anything could happen pretty much at any time, which is why grain growing kind of moved towards more arid areas of the United States because of transportation access. It made it easier to be able to bring grains in from the western part of our continent or from Europe. But since we're operating on a regional level, we're really looking at making sure that we all have the infrastructure to be able to deal with the things that climate change throws at us. So, you know, in the 14 years we've been malting, we've had certain years where we have droughts, and then we have other years where we have a lot of rain. This year in particular was a year where we had more rain events than I think any farmer that we've worked with can remember. We had flooding, we had crops completely underwater, farmers swimming in the fields that they had crops that were just ready to be harvested. And yet in such a wet year, we were able to source all of our grain still from the Northeast. And the way that that happened is because the farmers that we work with they have infrastructure that's making them more resilient. They have ways to harvest grain even if it's not completely dry yet, and to be able to dry that down on farm. We have some farms that we work with that are now storing 2 years worth of grain in order if there is a year where we're not able to get grain from the Northeast. And then we're also looking at diversifying where our grains are being grown, so that primarily a lot of our grains come from the Finger Lakes of New York and from Aroostook County in Maine. And we also have farms in other areas of the Northeast, so that hopefully they have different weather patterns. And then we're also diversifying in that we grow winter grains as well as spring grains. And so kind of making sure that we're hitting all of those areas of risk. We have been successful in 14 years of being a malt house in the Northeast that has been able to source 100% of our grains from the Northeast and have those grains still be really good quality. So that's kind of what we're doing on a regional level. Some of the effects of climate change, though, that we understand because we're in the business of malt and craft beer, that we're seeing more globally, is that, like Victoria said, the temperature rise. Barley is not a crop that really likes high temperatures. Barley is also a crop that doesn't like drought or a lot of rain. So barley yields around the world have been lower and will continue to be lower because of climate change. So that's kind of a bigger picture of what's happening. And obviously, if yields are going to be lower, prices are going to go up. And it's just going to be a more tentative crop to be able to grow. The other thing that we see is that with some of the effects of climate change and many detrimental years, farmers are simply leaving their occupation and they're selling their land to development because the Northeast also has huge population centers and huge issues with housing. And so a lot of what we see sometimes are farmers that kind of decide that this isn't working anymore, and that land then becomes a development. So those are some of the challenges of climate change, both in the Northeast and I think globally. One of the positive things of that is that it's now become more expensive to import malt from places like Germany and England. And so then craft malt, which is kind of a premium product because we're doing it on such a small scale and so locally, is actually now becoming price competitive with some of those European suppliers. So instead of getting your malt from, if you're a brewery in Boston and you're getting your malt from 4,000 miles away, it actually is now more competitive to maybe get your malt from a local craft malt house and be able to still have that, and have a more direct relationship. So that's kind of, again, I never expected that we would, in the Northeast, have issues with wildfires, but this year we had not only flooding, but we had a huge impact of smoke coming from the wildfires I'm sure a lot of you have probably experienced it down here or saw pictures of New York City and parts of New York where the air quality was just terrible, and all of that really stresses out us, but also stresses out crops. So that's something that was an unexpected happening this year. I never thought wildfires would be impacting what we do, but they certainly did this year.
And I'm going to adjust the question a bit for brewers. So thinking about the brewing process, I'm curious how the two of you integrate a consideration of the history of brewing, of different kinds of techniques, ingredients, in order to brew beers that are more sustainable or that can create beers that could be friendly to a changing climate.
Sure. Being that the owners of Montclair Brewery are from West Africa, my family being from the Caribbean, where that culture is accustomed to wasting very little, using as much as possible. We always like to say what is one man's garbage is another one's treasure. So with that in mind, there are things that we see that maybe others would normally do with the normal brewing process where maybe the water goes down the drain. We're able to reuse that water and make another batch of beer with that. We do that, and we have a series called our Outside the Box series. So usually we use also the water that would normally go down the drain to be able to create that series of beer. When it comes to the heating of the heating process of brewing, we also have a way that we're able to reuse that water as well too, that helps reheat. So as opposed to just letting that once again go down the drain. And if anyone is interested in learning more about that, my husband is here and he can give you a lot more details on that since he handles that. That's one of the ways when it comes to like water conservation. Also, just as far as the storytelling and being able to diversify or get more people interested in craft beer, which I think is also a big thing to do, because I think you opened up saying about how the industry as a whole is seeing some little decline. And we think one way to protect us from that is really seeing what else we can do, things that are not being done. And that includes what other audience members we can go after. So our target market, we're trying to introduce beer to people who, lots of time people come into our tap room and they're like, I don't normally drink beer. I know you may be wondering, then why are they here? But they may be coming with a friend or coming for an event or coming to see a band, and they're not really that familiar with beer. So that's why we actually offer a wide selection. So we'll brew with lots of different fruits. Especially we have our raspberry lambic, and we target that to wine drinkers. So if they say, hey, I normally drink wine, we're like, okay, well, most likely you may like this raspberry lambic because it's very light. It's only 4%, and it has lots of similar notes to wine. We'll brew with mango, we'll brew with guava, so with many different ingredients, and those usually, all genders like them, but especially women, who may not naturally like beer. That just opens up the door, and at least it's a conversation starter. They're like, wow, well, I love mango, so let me try it. Maybe I like it. And many times, on a weekly basis, we'll hear them saying, wow, I normally don't like beer, but I can actually drink this. So that's one of our goals, we said, is to produce beer that's not only for the craft beer fans, but also for people who are not familiar with beer, to open up the door to them, and to welcome them. And we make sure we train our staff to be very inclusive and inviting, so not to make anyone feel bad because they're not familiar with the different types of beer styles. So just to work with them and try to see if they can recommend something that's at their level and that may be something that they can enjoy.
We do some similar practices with like our spent grain. We make sure all of that just goes right out the door and to our local farmers who are readily coming to pick it up for their livestock. And we also, one of my favorites is we have some extra liquid that's in the lines, and so when we flush those lines, we harvest that small amount of beer, and our brewers like to have fun with it. So we have our little baby kegs. They're our R2D2s, and they have similar names, but our brewers get to have a lot of fun with those. And so on Tuesdays, we have specialty beers that they've made with just ingredients that they've had from their own home gardens or from, something interesting that we get to make new product with. But I think small breweries really have it easy because we don't worry until we don't get our order in and you don't have something. So a lot of times if you had a high demand, if you had a particular beer that was a very high demand and your hop was not available, that would be very difficult. Luckily, I think for a lot of small breweries, if there's not something in stock, we can use our creativity, which is great. Then we can kind of turn on the dime and use another malt or use another hop. So we are able to do that, which is great.
Thank you. So I'm going to invite questions from you in a moment. I have one question for you all. If you each could, if there is one thing that you would hope that American consumers would have in mind if they like beer, if they order beer, if they're going to, again, the store or restaurant, what do you hope they think about if we're thinking about this beer in the context of a changing climate?
I think on my end, we definitely, being in the hop industry, we understand the amount of work that goes into it. For a beer consumer, we understand that they're probably not thinking about all the work that it takes to get there. So we've really had the initiative of really opening up the consumer and our brewers to really think about it as more than a box of hops. It's more than just a box of hops landing at your door to make the beer. It's more than just going to the grocery store or the liquor store to picking up, a 6-pack of beer, or going to a brewery and just ordering something from there. So I think on my end as well, for selfish reasons, I think also thinking about the amount of work that like the physical labor that goes into it, with our farm workers, really making it possible for beer to happen and for hops to be readily available with all the different varieties and picked at the appropriate times. So I think thinking of it as more than a box of hops and like really humanizing it, because we cannot make this from a factory. As much as that would be easy, I think for everyone across the board, costs would go down. And for everyone, but that is not the reality. And if we want to have beer available in our communities for these brewers that create work of art, it needs to be humanized and it needs to be taken seriously if it's something that they want to continue to have.
Yeah, I would say I would like consumers to understand that brewing beer is a craft. It's actually a craft. We're not a huge factory just churning out the same thing, pressing buttons. That's a craft. So with any craft, sometimes while we try really hard to make sure everything is consistent, one batch after the other, understanding that it is a craft. So let's say if a hop is not available or if a certain grain is not available, we may have to sub and use something else. So because of that, there may be a little bit of difference from maybe a month ago when you bought that beer versus what you're purchasing now. Also, we make, for example, a hibiscus beer. Sometimes we source the hibiscus from West Africa. We actually import that. And sometimes we source it from the Caribbean. So it's different too. So the color, for instance, one may be a more vibrant red color versus the other. So just understand that it's a craft. So, and it's dependent on agriculture. So just like, the seasons change, sometimes there may be some inconsistencies, and understand that because it's not genetically modified. This is like actual real craft that we're using.
I love that. I think sometimes people forget. We were talking about all the many hands that go into the beer just getting to us at the brewery, and then what the many hands that go into making it and packaging and getting it out. And so I think that would be mine, is just kind of realizing the magnitude of all the people that are involved in the industry. And I think beer consumers now, and most consumers, are really interested in purpose-driven companies, people that have a message or a story, and they're doing something that's meaningful to them or to their communities. So, and I know you have them in all of your communities. They're right there waiting to share beer with you. So.
If I were to think of it's really hard to translate to the consumer the whole story about malt, grains, how it ties to agriculture. So if I had a wish, I would say that I wish that grains were part of people's awareness when they think about sourcing local. Because if you care about sourcing local grains, whether it's the flour in your muffins or the malt in your beer, you're going to be supporting developing a market, in my case, in the Northeast, where we can provide a market to signal to farmers, you can grow this crop and we will buy it. And if you grow this crop, which they already know, it's going to displace some of the corn and the soy that's being grown. And that's a huge monocrop, and that's a huge issue for sustainability in our food system and in our agricultural system. And grains, especially the ones that we grow, which are winter grains, help a lot of the places where these grains are being grown are near Lake Champlain, the Finger Lakes. These grains are actually helping to fix nitrogen into the soil and preventing things like algae blooms in our watershed. So I guess my wish would just be that if you're somebody who's passionate about the local food system and sustainable agriculture, please be aware that grains can be a part of that and should be a part of that, and try to support breweries that support local craft malt.
Thank you. Thank you. What questions? Yes, I see a question right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you all for being here. If in the district we have an increasing number of local brewers, obviously some here tonight. We also have the highest percentage of black-owned breweries in the country, and yet the fewest, yes, but the fewest who actually own their own brew pubs. And so we've seen unfortunately, some great breweries close and some great new breweries open. If you were able to say something to your state government, if you had a state, or to your federal government, since we're here in the district, what support would you want to see from your elected representatives to support more climate-friendly, women-owned, BIPOC-owned breweries?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm obviously I come from a sovereign nation, so we have our own government, and I wasn't able to actually sell my beer or make my beer on my own ancestral homelands. So so Asheville became my new home for craft beer. I think, I have a very unique story in that challenge. So, but I guess, I don't know, I wish I had the answer. I just think you have to just persevere. I mean, really, I'm sorry. I wish I had a better, I don't know how I made it. So I don't know, I can't give, I really don't, I know that's kind of crazy. I like slap myself all the time. I'm like, I don't know how I'm here. I just was so in love with my culture and I wanted to share it. And so craft beer made that way for me, so.
Yeah, I would say in New Jersey, so there's a lot that the government can do actually to help all breweries, and it's something that we're going through right now. So I'm also on the board of the New Jersey Brewers Association. And there's a bill on our governor's desk right now. It's about allowing breweries with tap rooms. It's about lifting the restrictions. They have restrictions on, let's say, like the number of events we can have, the number of TVs we can have in our tasting room, and the size of the TVs, whether we can collaborate with food vendors or not. So lots of restrictions that actually impede us from succeeding as a business. So there was two bills, one that was in the House, one that was in the Assembly that just passed, and right now the bill is just on the governor's desk. However, he refuses to sign it because he wants to do an alcohol overhaul and roll the brewery bill into that. Do you know that's going to take a lot longer and may not be possible? So right now he's like playing chess. Where are the pawns? The breweries in New Jersey. However, for now, they're not enforcing it to the end of the year. So lots of the New Jersey breweries are super excited because basically we're just doing everything, whatever we can do and get away with it, since they're not enforcing it just now. But what the government can do there to make it better for us is to finally just sign that and give us our freedom, and so that we can breathe and sleep at night and continue to plan longer term, and to make sure that our business is secure.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, right here in front.
I guess I can just so thanks for coming and sharing your beers with us. Really appreciate it. I was wondering, as the yield of barley declines, what would be the viability of substituting it with bread? I'll preface it. I'll say that
I have seen this like a year or two ago with a startup company, I forget, but they were working on this. So basically tackling the issue of like food waste with stale bread, and then also with the supply of barley going down.
I could venture to answer that. I think that food waste is a big part of sustainability, and that if there are ways that we can mitigate food waste from the get-go, but also finding alternate uses for things. A very popular drink in Eastern Europe is kvass, which is made from stale rye bread. And obviously bread has to be made from wheat, so you still need that cereal crop to succeed, and you want its yields to be good in order to make that bread. But completely agree with you that, you know, amidst climate change, part of our entire menu of ways to try to be more sustainable and more resilient would be to look at food waste and alternative sources of sugars to create the medium you need to make beer.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to invite you to find our speakers as we enjoy beer now after our conversation. But again, thank you very much for your attention, and please enjoy the beers. Okay. One more thing.
We're going to toast, a special toast. You got your beers. Here's another one. We need.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful panel. We've learned so much, and we're so grateful to all of you for traveling to Washington, D.C. to spend this evening with us and help us think about the future. There is one more thing we would like to do, however, and that is to toast our colleague, Teresa McCullough. As some of you may know, this is Teresa's last day at the National Museum of American History. This is her last event with us. She is starting a new job on Monday morning, never missing a beat, as the lead curator and museum director at Mars, Inc., here in the Washington area. So she will still be local, but she'll be doing a little bit more with chocolate, perhaps. But you know, once a beer, always a beer drinker. And so we want to tell Teresa how much we appreciate your 7 years here. You've added so much to the museum's collections, to the Smithsonian, and to really our understanding of the wonderful craft and home brewing industries. And you've introduced us to so many people, including this fantastic panel. So thank you, Teresa, and cheers.